Ready to move on? Excellent. Section 2 looks at adapting to the underwater world and some more about underwater respiration. We go over some more dive equipment and cover more detail on the buddy system, communication, and procedures. And then we'll jump into your next underwater adventure with the confined water dive preview. During your first confined water dive, you probably noticed that underwater, light, sound, and heat act differently. You've probably also noticed that things look larger or closer underwater. This is because of refraction, when light changes angle slightly as it goes from water to air, causing about a 33% magnification. Water also absorbs and reflects light, not only making it darker underwater than above, but absorbing color as you go deeper. First you lose red, then orange, yellow, green, and finally blue at the greatest depths. Water also affects sound. You'll hear things, but it's often difficult to tell where they're coming from. This is because sound travels about 4 times faster in water. Obviously, you won't be talking underwater, but you can still use sound to get your buddy's attention. You've probably noticed that you chill faster underwater than in air. Water conducts heat about 20 times faster than air, so comfortable temperatures in air are too cold in water without protection from a wetsuit or dry suit. Left unchecked, heat loss can lead to hypothermia, a serious condition in which your body cools so much it can't function normally. Continuous, uncontrollable shivering is your body's signal that you've lost too much body heat. No matter what kind of exposure protection you're wearing, if you begin to shiver, end the dive immediately and seek warmth. If you've ever tried to run in waist-deep water, you've experienced how its density resists motion. To save energy and avoid getting out of breath while diving, you want to swim slowly and steadily. Avoid rapid, jerky movements, which waste energy and make you use your air faster. Your profile affects this too. You want to be streamlined and horizontal to reduce drag, with your gauges tucked in close and with proper weighting. Dangling gauges add drag, bash and damage themselves, and can destroy aquatic life. Too much weight drags your hips down, disrupting your streamlining because you're not horizontal in the water. Learn to pace yourself, take it easy and relax while diving. Even though you breathe air from your scuba tank, you breathe a little bit differently underwater than at the surface. As you probably know, your body can only use the air that actually reaches your lungs. The air passages to and from your lungs are dead air spaces that play no part in gas exchange. Snorkels and regulators increase this space, so when you inhale, the first air into your lungs is air from your previous exhalation, high in waste carbon dioxide exhaled with your last breath. If you breathe shallowly, you inhale proportionally little fresh air, but if you inhale deeply, you draw in proportionately more. So slow, deep breathing is more efficient and the way to breathe when you're underwater. Another thing you'll notice is that it's harder to breathe dense air underwater. If you overexert yourself, trying to breathe the dense air can make you experience fatigue, labored breathing, a feeling of suffocation, weakness, anxiety, headache, muscle cramping, or a tendency to panic. If this happens, stop everything, breathe deeply, and rest while you catch your breath. If you experience overexertion at the surface, get buoyant by inflating your BCD or dropping your weights. Then rest and catch your breath. Signal for help if you need to. Once you recover, proceed at a slower pace. Prevent overexertion by pacing yourself to avoid breathlessness. Know your physical limits, move slowly, and avoid prolonged exertion. It's not unusual to have a little bit of water in your snorkel or regulator, especially after clearing it. Using airway control, you can breathe past this water by inhaling slowly and cautiously, and by using your tongue as a splash guard to keep water from entering your mouth. After you get a breath, exhale sharply to clear the remaining water. If you accidentally inhale some water, you may cough and choke a bit. Hold in your regulator or snorkel and cough as you need to. Swallowing may help too. So, in a nutshell, your breathing goals underwater are to always breathe slowly, deeply, and continuously when using scuba. Strive to develop airway control. Okay, let's look at more of the stuff you get to use, including exposure suits, weight systems, dive tools and knives, gear bags, and diving instruments. You'll probably want an exposure suit for virtually every dive to reduce heat loss and to protect you from incidental scrapes or stings. Made of stretch nylon or similar fabrics, bodysuits don't insulate much, but you wear them primarily in warm water for protection. They also help you slide into a wetsuit and provide some extra insulation, so many divers also wear them under their wetsuit. By far the most common exposure suit is the wetsuit. Wetsuits have different styles and thicknesses, making them suitable for a wide temperature range. They insulate you with a layer of neoprene foam. You get wet, but the suit traps the water against your skin. The water quickly warms, and as long as it remains trapped, it doesn't contribute to further heat loss. Dry suits provide the most insulation by keeping you dry. The suit keeps out the water, and you wear an insulating undergarment to retain heat. Because air conducts heat relatively poorly, air plus the undergarment provides the most insulation possible. Diving in a dry suit isn't difficult, but it calls for some special techniques covered in a short course. If you'll be using a dry suit in this course, your instructor will go over these and have you practice using one. You choose your exposure suit based on where you'll be diving, and you may find that you need more than one kind. Your local Padi dive center or resort can help you select the best one for your needs. Just remember that it's not cold water that's no fun, but being cold. With the right suit, you can dive even the coolest water in relative comfort. And also, remember that just because you're protected from the reef doesn't mean the reef's protected from you. Your suit may reduce the risk of getting hurt by aquatic organisms, but you're still responsible for reducing the risk you pose to them. Rinse any exposure suit in fresh water after using it. Dry the inside, then the outside, and store it in a cool, dry place. Lubricate zippers according to manufacturer guidelines. Store wetsuits on large, wide hangers, not thin ones like wire. You typically store dry suits rolled up in their bags. In water colder than about 21 degrees centigrade, 70 degrees Fahrenheit, you'll want some exposure protection for your head, hands, and feet with hoods, gloves, and wetsuit boots. And you may want to use some of these all the time for protection. With wetsuits and most dry suits, you use a neoprene wetsuit hood. Bibbed hoods have a broad flange you tuck into the suit. Some dry suits don't have a place to tuck a bib, so you use an unbibbed hood. you wear a hooded vest under a wetsuit to provide extra insulation for your torso. You can also get jackets with attached hoods. In cooler water, wetsuit gloves keep your fingers from becoming numb. In warmer water, you can wear thinner reef gloves for protection with more dexterity. But keep in mind that gloves don't give you a license to touch anything you want with abandon. You can still get cuts or stings through gloves if you're not careful. Many divers wear wetsuit boots even in tropical water because they provide some foot protection as well as warmth. Wet and dry suits are such good insulators that you can overheat on a warm day before you get in the water. To avoid this, set up all your other gear before getting into your exposure suit. Once in it, limit your activity and protect yourself as much as possible from the sun. Keep your hood off or pulled back if you're wearing one. Leave your jacket unzipped as long as possible, and if necessary, cool down by jumping in the water momentarily or getting sprayed down with a hose. Most people float, and with a wetsuit or dry suit, you will float. Your weight system just offsets this positive buoyancy and allows you to sink. When you're properly weighted, you sink slowly, not like a rock. The most common weight systems are weight belts and BCD integrated weight systems. With either type, the most important feature is a quick release system that allows you to dump your weight one-handed in an emergency. So it's important that you wear your weight system so nothing interferes with ditching your weights if you need to regain positive buoyancy in an emergency. Whether you choose a weight belt or an integrated system depends on your preferences and how much weight you need. You'll learn to set how much weight you use a little later in this section. Most weight systems require minimal maintenance. A brief rinse usually does it. Handle them carefully though. Dropping weight can break gear or toes. Scuba units with weight systems don't usually stand well, so lay them over so they don't fall. Let's go over the options you have in alternate air sources. Hopefully, you won't ever need it, but just in case, you should always have one. An alternate air source is any second stage you may use other than your own primary second stage to ascend while breathing normally. Most alternates require your buddy's help. The extra second stage, sometimes called an octopus, typically has an extra long hose to make it easier to use. An alternate inflator regulator combines the low-pressure inflator with a second stage, so you find it on the BCD hose. With this alternate, your buddy gives you the primary second stage and switches to the alternate inflator regulator. From the first confined water dive, you're already familiar with the low-pressure inflator. The inflator comes standard with your BCD unless you opt for an alternate inflator regulator which your dive center or resort installs for you. When you invest in your BCD, your dive center or resort will connect the inflator hose to your regulator first stage. Be sure to rinse the low-pressure inflator thoroughly after each use, along with the rest of your BCD. You carry a dive knife or dive tool, so you've got a practical tool at hand in case you need it for an emergency as well as for convenience. Take care of your knife by rinsing it in fresh water after each use and by carefully sharpening and cleaning it as needed according to manufacturer instructions. It's important to invest in a quality gear bag. Choose one made from heavy-duty fabric that will hold all your gear except your tank, weights, and dry suit if you have one. Get one a bit bigger than you need now so you can add to your kit and still have room. You can get many styles and features in gear bags depending on what you like. Your bag doesn't require much preparation or care. Pack it in reverse order from which you need your gear so that what you need is on top. This way, you don't have to pull everything out to suit up. When you wash your gear after diving, rinse the salt out of your bag and let it dry before storing it. Since you're not a fish and lack most fish instincts, you use instruments to give you information underwater. As you learn, there are limits to how long you can stay underwater depending on previous dives and how deep you go. To track time, you either need a dive watch or a bottom timer. Underwater watches may be analog or digital. Most manufacturers rate their scuba diving watches for 200 meters or deeper, more or less. No, you won't be going that deep, but these are the ones designed with scuba in mind. A bottom timer does the same job, but it's pressure activated, so you don't have to remember to set or start it. Depth gauges tell how deep you are. It's mandatory equipment, no surprise there. Although there are analog models, the digital versions combined with your bottom timer are the most popular. It's amazing how the underwater world can throw off your sense of direction. You use a compass to track where you are so you can follow a specific course, find your way back to the exit, and so on. An underwater compass is liquid-filled and pressure-resistant and has reference marks called the lubber line and index markers that you align to swim along a given heading. You'll learn how to use your compass a bit later. You learned about SPGs in Section 1. It's mandatory equipment, pretty obvious, and often combined with other gauges. For one, it may be part of an instrument console, which packages several gauges together. Consoles put all your information in one place, but they're bulkier and more likely to drag and damage aquatic life if you're not careful. So many divers prefer wrist mounting their gauges. This adds a step when kitting up, but it's more streamlined because gauges on your wrist don't dangle. The ultimate dive instrument is the dive computer, which combines your bottom timer, depth gauge, and sometimes your SPG into an instrument that calculates your allowable remaining underwater time. They're quickly becoming standard equipment, and you'll learn more about using them in Section 5. Your Padi Dive Center or resort can help you choose a computer or other instruments that suit the kind of diving you'll be doing. Your primary maintenance for all instruments is, you guessed it, washing them thoroughly in fresh water after each use. But also, treat them carefully. They're precision instruments, so avoid banging or dropping them and avoid prolonged sun exposure. In Section 1, we looked at the buddy system. Now let's look at communication and procedures you use to make the buddy system effective. Sound carries well underwater, but without special electronic equipment, talking underwater is nearly useless. So you communicate with your hands, by signaling or writing. First, get your buddy's attention. Now you can pass a message on a slate, but for routine communication, it's fastest to use signals. There are 25 standard signals. They're pretty intuitive, and you'll probably make up more with your buddy to suit the occasion. Sometimes you need to communicate with someone on a boat or ashore from the surface. As you just saw, waving means help, so don't greet someone that way. To get attention, carry a whistle on your BCD inflator, where you can reach it without having to dig in a pocket. When you're in rougher water in particular, an inflatable signal tube makes it easier for the boat to spot you amid the waves. When diving with your buddy, you want to plan your dive together. There are 9 points to discuss and agree on. First, agree on appropriate entry and exit points and techniques. Then, agree on the course to follow, along with depth and time limits. You should establish and review communications and decide on a returning air pressure. Discuss how you'll stay together and also what to do if you're separated. Go over emergency procedures and agree on your dive objective. Plan your dive together and then dive your plan together. Before each dive, run through each other's equipment using the pre-dive safety check. Use the phrase, begin with, review, and friend to help you remember the checks. Start with begin, B, BCD. Check operation, adjustment, and that the inflator's hooked up. If appropriate, be sure it's partially inflated for the entry. Width, W, weights. Check for proper weighting and that the quick release system is free and clear for ditching with a right-hand release. Review, R, releases. Make sure you and your buddy are familiar with each other's releases and that they're secure. And, A, air. Confirm that you have enough air for the dive, that your valves are open, and that you know where to find and how to use each other's alternate air sources. Friend, F, final OK. Give each other a final inspection, looking for unsecured gauges, missing or out-of-place gear, and so on. Make a habit of performing this check. It goes pretty quick once you know it. During the dive, stay close to your buddy. It's easiest if you agree on who will lead, where you're going, and what to do if you get separated. The rule of thumb is to look for each other for no more than a minute and then reunite on the surface. But you may modify this if conditions, such as current, warrant. Anyway, the point is it's your responsibility to stay with your buddy and follow the rules, guidelines, and recommendations for each other's safety. No one can do it for you. Time to head to the water. Let's go over what you'll be learning and practicing during your second pool or confined water dive. If your instructor had your gear set up for you during your last session, you'll probably set it up for this one. Then gear up like you learned last time. Starting with this confined water dive, you and your buddy will begin practicing the pre-dive safety check. Remember, BWRAF, BCD, weights, releases, air, and final OK. You'll learn several water entries during this course, and the one to use in any situation is usually the easiest. If you can wade or lower yourself in, that's usually better than a long drop. You obviously don't attempt entries from excessive heights. One entry you may practice is the giant stride. After kitting up and the pre-dive safety check, check that the entry area is clear. Inflate your BCD about halfway so you'll be buoyant while you wait for your buddy to enter. Check that your buddy's ready, breathe from your regulator, and hold your mask so the water doesn't dislodge it when you hit the water. Then, step out as though walking. After entering, signal you're okay and clear the area while you wait for your buddy. You may also practice the controlled seated entry, which is useful from a low, stable platform like a dock, swim step, or poolside. After checking the area, Making sure your buddy's ready and partially inflating your BCD, reach across yourself like this. Pivot on your hands and ease into the water. Easy. During this confined water dive, you'll start using your snorkel to save tank air when you're on the surface. If you've never used a snorkel, it's pretty simple. Put it in your mouth, exhale to blow out any water, and then breathe. To clear water from your snorkel, simply exhale sharply and forcefully through it to blow out the water, like shooting a giant pea shooter. Clear any water that sloshes in while you're using it in the same way. Take your first breath cautiously after clearing it, just in case there's a bit of water left. You can breathe past the water by inhaling slowly and letting air bubble through until you've got enough air to blow out the remaining water. Commonly, you'll snorkel on the surface to save tank air until you reach your dive site, then switch to the regulator and descend. At the end of the dive, you'll switch back to snorkel and swim back to the boat or shore. So, your instructor will have you practice switching back and forth between your regulator and snorkel with your face in the water. It's simply a matter of taking a breath, switching, and then exhaling sharply to clear the snorkel or regulator, like this. Practice until you can do it effortlessly. Your instructor will also have you practice swimming at the surface while snorkeling. Keep your arms at your side, look ahead so you don't hit anything, and keep your feet underwater. You may find it more relaxing to swim on your back. When you reach the place where you want to dive, you and your buddy go through 5 steps for starting your descent, which you'll begin practicing during this confined water dive. First, signal that you're ready to go down. Next, orient to something at the surface so you'll know where you are when you come back up. Third, set your watch bezel or start your stopwatch function if necessary. And then fourth, switch to your regulator. Finally, slowly deflate your BCD and exhale to start down. Equalize immediately upon submerging and do so frequently as you descend. Stay relatively head up, which makes it easier to equalize, and so you can kick to slow your descent if you need to. It doesn't happen often, but you can lose your mask underwater. Just in case, you'll want to practice breathing without a mask while keeping water out of your nose. It sounds harder than it is. You might find it easiest to inhale through your mouth and exhale through your nose to start, but practice until you can breathe just through your mouth. If you need to look up, exhale through your nose as you do to keep water out. Your instructor will have you breathe without your mask for at least a minute, which will be long enough to reach the surface on a typical dive. Of course, usually, if you lose your mask, you or your buddy will find it. Put it back on like this, making sure to keep hair or the edge of your hood out from the edge so it seals okay. Clear the mask and replace the strap, or replace the strap and then clear it. Whatever works best for you. If your BCD or dry suit inflator were to stick open, it would inflate your BCD or suit, possibly leading to a runaway ascent. To stop this, simply disconnect the low-pressure hose. To simulate a sticking inflator, your instructor may have you hold down the inflation button with one hand while you disconnect the hose. If you had to disconnect your inflator hose, or if you had no air in your cylinder, you'd have to inflate your BCD orally. During this confined water dive, you'll practice doing this at the surface, like you would to stay afloat. Simply take a breath and blow into the BCD hose mouthpiece while opening the same button you use to deflate. Blow in about 2/3 of your breath and release the valve button. Repeat this until you float comfortably, and note that you can save energy by letting your face go under while you blow into the BCD, and then lift your face for the next breath. This is easier than fighting to keep your face out the whole time. During this dive, you'll get to set your weight so you don't use too much or too little. Here's what you do. First, get in the water with all your gear on and your best guess as to how much weight you need. Second, with your regulator in your mouth, deflate your BCD and hold a normal breath at the surface. Third, relax and see where you float. If you're weighted properly, you'll float at about eye level. Add or subtract weight until you do. And then fourth, exhale. You should begin to descend slowly. Finally, if you do this with a full cylinder, add about 2 kilos or 5 pounds to compensate for the weight of the air you use during the dive. If you watch your SPG closely, you should never find yourself running out of air. But you should know what it feels like just in case, so you have as much warning as possible. To simulate low air, your instructor closes your tank valve while you breathe from your regulator. When breathing gets difficult, signal out of air and your instructor will reopen it. Resume breathing. That's all there is to it, but it gives you a good idea of what it feels like if you accidentally breathe your tank empty. You started learning ascent basics in your first confined water dive, so let's build on that. A proper ascent has 5 steps you'll begin practicing during this dive. First, you and your buddy signal and agree to ascend. Second, you note the time you've been underwater. Third, you reach up with your right hand as a guard and hold up your BCD hose with your left to release expanding air as you come up. Fourth, look up and around as you come up, slowly rotating if you need to make sure everything's clear above. Fifth, you ascend no faster than 18 meters, 60 feet per minute while breathing normally. When you reach the surface, inflate your BCD so you float before you remove the regulator from your mouth. In an emergency at the surface, your first reaction should be to get buoyant. If you can't do this with your BCD, you drop your weight. During this confined water dive, your instructor will have you practice doing this. If you're using a weight belt, reach down with your right hand, release the buckle, and pull it clear. Make sure there's no one below before you drop it. If you're using a weight system, you'll use the system's quick release. For simplicity or to avoid pool damage, your instructor may have you remove most of the weights before you practice this. Sometimes you'll need to slip out of your scuba gear to exit the water, like when you're diving from a small boat with no ladder. First, remove your weight system and hand it up or lay it on the pool side. If you have a weight-integrated BCD, it's usually fine to leave them in it. Next, slide out of your scuba system and be sure it has enough air to float before you let go. Remove your fins last if you need to, but you may find it best to wear them so you can kick as you lift yourself out of the water, like this. Okay, that's it for section 2. Won't be too long before you're doing this in open water.